The new discoveries here at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre happened during a recent restoration around the tomb of Jesus. That's when excavators dug below the original level of the 4th century church.
There are places in the world where history and faith overlap so densely that every footstep feels heavy with centuries of memory. Jerusalem's Old City is one of those places, and within it, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre sits at the crossroads of devotion and archaeology, long revered as the location of crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. Recent archaeological work beneath and around the church has brought fresh evidence into view, traces of quarrying, rock-cut tombs, and signs of cultivation that align strikingly with details from the Gospel accounts.
Danny, what did they find?
Wow. This is really an exciting discovery, which I must say that I noticed when they were actually picking it out from the ground, and I hesitated and said, wow, this is it. And I published it, and we spoke about this, but it's now coming out in headlines in the official media.
This is not a call to settle debates. Archaeology rarely offers completely tidy answers, but an invitation to listen as layers of stone, pollen, and pottery quietly add context to a landscape that has been sacred for millennia. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is itself a palimpsest. Over the centuries it has been rebuilt, repaired, expanded, and restored. The structure visible today contains work from the Byzantine era, medieval rebuilding after fires and earthquakes, Crusader additions, Ottoman repairs, and modern conservation. Beneath those visible walls lies an even longer story. Archaeologists working in and around the church have been able to read that story much as one reads pages of a book. Each layer of earth, each cut in the rock, each discarded shard of pottery helps date a chapter. What emerges is a long sequence, quarrying activity in antiquity, later reused as burial space, then intentional memorialization by Christian communities in the 4th century and after. This sequence matters because it matches, in broad outline, the kinds of human activity one would expect around a site identified as a place of execution, burial, and memory. Quarries were common sources of building stone in and around Jerusalem. As quarries fell out of use, their hollows and ledges were often adapted, niches cut for burials, terraces used for small gardens, and spaces later covered as cities grew. When Constantine and his mother Helena sponsored the erection of memorial buildings in the 4th century, those ancient places were often beneath or within the footprint of the new monuments. One of the clearest strands of evidence emerging from the excavations is the presence of rock-cut tombs fashioned in a style consistent with Second Temple period burial practices. These tombs, cut directly into the bedrock with well-defined benches or loculi, and sometimes with small courtyards or burial niches, match the funerary architecture of Jerusalem in the centuries immediately before and after the turn of the era. Why is this significant? Gospel narratives describe Jesus being laid in a new tomb in a nearby garden, John 19 verse 41 and 4:2. A new tomb adjacent to a cultivated plot is not an image conjured only by later devotion. It is an arrangement known from archaeological contexts of the time. Finding tombs of the same period in a quarry area that later became associated with memorial veneration connects physical geography with textual traces in a way that merits attention. Caution is required. Dating tomb architecture has margins of uncertainty, and tombs of similar form could be reused across generations. Yet when unbroken pottery, charcoal, or other datable material is found in sealed contexts within a tomb or its floor, archaeologists can often produce a reasonably confident date range. In this case, the pattern of architecture and associated finds has inclined many specialists to identify the primary use of these tombs with the late Iron Age through Second Temple periods, the same long sweep of time in which the Gospels place the events of Holy Week. Perhaps the most evocative line of evidence has been botanical. Paleobotanical methods, analysis of ancient pollen, seeds, and microscopic plant residues preserved in soil, can reveal whether an area was dominated by wild vegetation or deliberately cultivated. Samples taken from terraces and fill layers around the rock-cut tombs have yielded pollen types consistent with vegetables and garden plants, along with soil characteristics suggestive of managed plots. In short, the archaeology supports the existence of small, tended garden areas in close proximity to burial niches. That corresponds with gospel descriptions that place the new tomb in a garden setting, and it explains why Mary of Magdala might have assumed the man she encountered near the emptied tomb was the gardener. John 20 verse 50. Again, we should be careful not to overread. Gardens and burials are not unique combinations in the ancient Near East, but the convergence of quarry, tombs from the relevant era, and botanical indicators of cultivation in the exact area long associated with early Christian memory makes for a persuasive composite. The place people later remembered as a garden tomb appears to have the environmental fingerprints one would expect. By the 4th century, when Constantine's mother Helena visited Jerusalem, the landscape of memory had already been shaped by local traditions and centuries of lived practice. Helena's program of church building, including the establishment of a monumental complex protecting sites venerated as the place of crucifixion and the tomb, formalized and preserved these places in stone. That architecture, in turn, preserved the very earlier layers archaeologists are now peeling back. Excavations reveal that early Christian builders worked around, above, and sometimes incorporated pre-existing rock features. In some areas, the foundations of the Constantinian shrine rest upon earlier quarry faces or filled depressions. Pilgrims, graffiti, funerary inscriptions from later periods, and layers of devotional use indicate that from the earliest centuries the site drew sustained attention. This continuity of veneration adds another dimension to the story. Whether or not a particular tomb can be proven in the scientific sense to be the grave of an individual described in the Gospels, the archaeological record clearly shows that people in antiquity understood this area to be sacred and arranged their architecture and devotional life accordingly. The material remains and the historical memory reinforce each other. Archaeology seldom furnishes dramatic, single-line proofs. Instead, it offers converging lines of evidence that make certain reconstructions more likely and others less likely. In this case, the picture that emerges beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is one of long-term use and reuse, quarrying in antiquity, adaptation of worked rock into tombs during the Second Temple period, traces of cultivation consistent with a garden landscape, early Christian memorialization, and later Byzantine construction. For historians, this adds context. The topography and use of the area match the kinds of urban and funerary practices described in historical sources. For biblical scholars, it supplies environmental detail that fits gospel narratives. For those who come with faith, such findings can be deeply meaningful. The garden tomb image moves from the realm of purely textual memory into the realm of lived place again. For skeptics, it offers an opportunity to test narratives against material reality. Importantly, these discoveries do not compel belief, they invite reflection. They do not abolish ambiguity, they narrow it. They remind us that ancient texts arose in real landscapes, and those landscapes sometimes retain the memory of the events that shaped them. Archaeology is also a profoundly human discipline. Field teams carefully remove soil layers, document contexts, and conserve fragile finds. Specialists in pottery typology, paleobotany, geoarchaeology, and osteology contribute narrow, rigorous expertise. Local workers, sometimes generations of families, bring practical knowledge of the stone, the weather, and the city's daily rhythms. The discoveries beneath the Holy Sepulchre are the result of patient, interdisciplinary labor, sampling soil for microscopic remains, analyzing seed and pollen spectra, matching pottery shapes to dated typologies, and recording stone cuts and tool marks that trace the hand of ancient masons. Each sample vial and each labeled shard is a small act of connection between our moment and theirs. Archaeology under living holy sites raises delicate questions about access, preservation, and reverence. Conservation must balance the pursuit of knowledge with respect for worship and pilgrimage. The best projects are collaborative, scholars working with custodial communities, museums, and local authorities to ensure that research enriches public understanding while protecting fragile remains. There are open questions that future work may address. Can additional sealed contexts yield absolute radiocarbon dates? Might inscriptions or small artifacts directly tied to a narrower time frame appear? How did the use of the site change in the immediate decades after the events remembered there? These are not rhetorical, they are invitations to continue patient work. At the end of the day, the stones beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre offer neither shrill triumphalism nor dismissive recoil. They offer texture and depth. They suggest that the people who told and retold those first stories lived in a landscape that could plausibly match the gospel scenes. They remind us that memory can be anchored by place, and place can be recovered by careful study. Whether you come as historian, pilgrim, skeptic, or believer, there is something grounding in that convergence. It invites us to pause, to listen, to imagine the quiet garden as well as the thunder of the crowd, to trace the work of ancient quarrymen as well as the prayers of pilgrims who followed. It asks for neither blind faith nor cynical denial, but for a humble curiosity that can hold both the data of science and the claims of faith in a thoughtful tension. In the layers of stone and soil, in pollen and pottery, a story continues to unfold, one that reminds us how closely our human lives remain tied to the past. The church above will continue to be a place of worship, and the ground beneath will continue to be a source of study. Together, they form a single voice, history speaking softly, inviting us to remember, to wonder, and to look more deeply at the life that shaped the world we live in.